Hey, small group leaders. So this week we are in John chapter 2, verses 13 to 25. And so this part of the chapter is where Jesus is tearing the temple courts apart because of the people selling things in the temple court, and then saying that he will raise the temple again in 3 days if they destroy it. So what do we learn about Jesus here? What do we learn about how we relate to Jesus? What I think we learn about Jesus from the first part, where he is just throwing the money around, driving out the animals with a whip, throwing the tables over of the people selling the animals in the marketplace, not in the marketplace, in the temple, turning the temple into a marketplace, is that we learn of Jesus's passionate respect for God, and he sets such an example there, of what it's like to just go so hard against the grain, so hard against the status quo, when God's respect and God's name is on the line. And so down in the application questions, I asked the question: we are often tempted to keep the status quo rather than obey God. Share, if you can, a time this happened to you. And so just to challenge students, and I think just preface this with that it's okay to not be perfect. It's okay to have messed up here, because this is something that everyone does. Just to challenge them to be honest and to think of a time, or times, that they were tempted to, and that they did choose normalcy and choose the status quo over God's commandments. And so that would be challenging for them to think of. And then following that up with, what example does Jesus set for us on this topic? And we just look at how he reacted in the temple courts, just when he saw people defiling the name of God. And I use the additional scripture there is Psalm 69, 6 to 12, because when in verse 17 of John chapter 2, he quotes the psalm. John quotes the psalm. He says, "Zeal for your house will consume me." So this is the psalm where John chapter 2 verse 17 comes from, and it just talks about how again, it's zeal for your house will consume me, and I will endure scorn for your sake, and shame covers my face. I'm a foreigner to my own family, a stranger to my mother's children. For zeal for your house consumes me, and the insults of those who insult you fall on me. And just the example that Jesus sets here, that the name of God and the respect of God is just first and foremost over everything. And we're going to be challenged, and we're going to be tempted at times in our life to just want to fit in and just hit the status quo. But he just sets the example here to that nothing is worth forsaking the name of God. That it is first among everything. So I love that example that he sets there, though it's a challenging one to follow, and good for our kids to chew on. And what I think we learn about Jesus and how we relate to Jesus in the second part, is that, priests used to be the ones who would enter into the Holy of Holies in temples. And the Holy of Holies inside the temple was God's dwelling place on earth. And that's where the priests would have to enter into in order to communicate, in order to speak with God. And Jesus becomes the new temple. It says straight in John in verse 21, but the temple he had spoken of was his body. So what does it mean for us? What does it mean for our prayer life, for our relationship with God, that no longer do any rituals have to happen, does any pilgrimage have to happen to anywhere, but that we have communion with God through Jesus anywhere that we are, and just to hopefully grow in our students an understanding and an appreciation for that, just for the lengths that people used to have to go to, and now just how accessible and how present he is for us because of Jesus. And just the supporting scripture I have for that is John 14:6, which is, "No one comes to the Father except through me," that he is the way, and how great that is for us. And finally, I finish with the question: through his actions in the temple, what does Jesus show us are his main desires for our faith? And I use the verse there, Matthew 22:36 to 40, because there it's when Jesus is asked, what's the greatest commandment in the law? And Jesus replies, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. But just how Jesus says that love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. That nothing comes above that. Nothing comes above loving God with our entire being. And so he just desires for us, just not just because it's what he commands of us, but because he loves us and because he knows that that is by far the most life we will find when we're living in that way. So just to encourage our students in that there is nothing that they have to do extra, like no pilgrimage they have to make, no special prayer they have to say in order to communicate with Jesus, that he just so greatly desires for us to seek him above everything else. So I hope this video helps if you watch it, and we're excited to see you guys on Wednesday.